Hello and welcome to episode number 11 of the Curling Legends podcast. My name's Kevin Palmer, and each week through the curling season, I share a conversation with a player or storyteller from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. We cover curling from the beginning of the slide through to the adoption of the free guard zone. Rod Hunter is on the show today. First, I want to thank you once again for listening, and if you're listening to us on the computer, just to remind you that you can also get us on your smartphone using iTunes, Stitcher, or any number of apps that you can get your podcasts on. And if you have a friend or family member that would be interested in the show but struggles with technologies, please give them a hand and show them how to listen. Of course, you can catch us on our webpage, curlinglegends.ca, as well as our Facebook page, facebook.com/curlinglegends. Thank you again to Jerry Gertz of Curling Zone for his support of the podcast. And again, Steve Lobel, who provides the artwork, and Mark Rogman, who provided the music. Rod Hunter, also known as The Arrow, now lives in Viking, Alberta, and I was fortunate to spend an afternoon with him at his home and record a conversation where we talked about the many years growing up in Winnipeg, his start at the Deer Lodge Club and the Winter Club, and then eventually his move over to the Granite Curling Club, where he connected with Brian Wood, Jim Pettipiece, and then late in 1969, they pulled Don Duguid out of retirement and formed a team that would go on to win 2 consecutive Briers and World Championships. And particularly in those World Championships would go undefeated in 17 games, a feat that has not been done since and perhaps never will be repeated. After Duguid retired once again, they found success in 73 with Danny Fink as the skip, but that year Brian Wood took a year off, and John Hunter, Rod's brother, joined the team. And then in 1975, Rod skipped his own rink with Mike Riley at third. Brian Wood joined them again at lead, but Doug Holmes replaced Jim Pettipiece at second that season. Rod will share stories of those years, how that Duguid rink was formed, and he'll talk a lot about curling in Manitoba, experiences through many MCAs, including the reunion of the Duguid rink in 1988. And he'll talk a little bit about his thoughts on the modern game and share some stories that he has. So please note, at the end of the episode, we're going to wrap up our conversation, but I had the mics running. So at that point, what I've done is just collected some of those stories and pieced them together towards the end. So please be sure to listen right through to the end of the conversation and beyond. I really had a wonderful time. It was a great experience to meet with Rod, and I hope you enjoy it. So here's my conversation with Rod the Arrow Hunter.
The Tournament of Champions was actually run Maple Leaf Gardens, and it ran for not a long time. It went for about 3 years, 3 or 4 maybe, and it was basically put on by Doug Maxwell. He was kind of the organizing guy, and we played in Maple Leaf Gardens. For me, that was the year that I first actually started playing in the, quote, big leagues, was with Bonspiel. They won the Brier in 65, and then in 66, his brother Ronnie was in his last year of medicine and said, well, I can't play. So I got a phone call. I was working at Jasper Park Lodge going to university, and I got a call in the staff cabin there from Terry in the middle of the summer. And we had a meeting, and we want you, see if you'd be interested in coming and curling with us.
So they approached you.
So he phoned me in Jasper, and I said, oh, that's kind of cool. I just played in the Granite Juniors before that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you were a young player at the time. And
yeah, and they were young. I mean, if you think about it, Terry's not, at that point, he was 25 when he won the Brier in 65, so he was like 26. So that's not that much older than I was then, right? And that was the second Brier he'd been to, because he was there when he was 18. And that team was incredible, because Turnbull was on it. He was 17, and Ronnie Bronstein was 17. Yeah. Terry was 18. John Van Hellemond was 15. Yeah. They phoned him the night before the Manitoba Bonspiel, had never met the guy, and said, we need a player. Can he play? He had to ask his mother if he could miss school, Yeah. Anyway, they ended up going to the Manitoba Bonspiel, winning the province, and going to the Brier. And if you watch the Brier film from that year, 58, you don't see Johnny Hellemond sweeping at all, because he was so little.
Yeah, I heard he wasn't a large. Didn't have the large forearms either.
No. He was, and he was a good player, and they lost the playoff that year to Matt Baldwin, the Brier. Next year, John Van Helmond won the Manitoba High School Championship. So he's basically the only guy that ever played in the high school Canadian Championship with a Purple Heart.
After getting a Purple Heart playing in the Brier.
Yeah.
So let's go back for you, Rod. So your earliest days so where'd you grow up and kind of first through rocks?
My dad was from Boulder, Manitoba, and he curled in high school and all that kind of stuff. And then after the war, and he was practicing law in Winnipeg, he joined the Deer Lodge Curling Club because it was close to where we lived. And he played there for his whole life, from back in the 40s right through till the last time he played. The guy who was a member then was, there was actually brothers, Jimmy and Alec Welsh. And they won the Brier back in 47 or whatever, and they went to the Brier about 3 or 4 times. And so my dad curled against them. He couldn't beat him. Never beat Jimmy Welsh ever. So I started curling actually at the Winnipeg Winter Club just as a kid when I was 12. And
so why the Winter Club and not the Deer Lodge?
Well, just because we'd moved from St. James over to River Heights, they joined the Winter Club. So my buddies, we used to go after school, get in the bus and go down to the Winter Club and play badminton and different stuff. And we decided to curl.
Curling for you at that point is just one other sport.
It was it was. But when I started, and we had a great coach, my first coach, Charlie Hickling, at the Winter Club, and he was a great man, and he'd come out and work with the juniors. And the one thing that he always would do at the end of the practice or the game, he'd take a look at your right knee, and if you had a mark on it, dirt mark, he'd give you what for. Like, don't drag your knee on the ice.
Really? Okay.
Really. So, and that stuck there forever. And so when I was throwing, I was conscious that knee is not going to be riding on the ice.
Now, at the time, what was your slide technique, though? Did you not start out as a
I started out as a tuck.
Yeah.
For about the first 2 years, because that's what everybody in Manitoba did. And
So when you mean everybody, like even larger than you see today?
One of the guys that didn't throw that way, there was a couple. Orest Melishuk always threw flat foot, and Bruce Hudson was another one. But like Jimmy Ursel and Norm Hauk and all these other guys all threw with a tuck. They all played at Strathcona Curling Club. They had an amazing A group. Most of the guys in A group had won a Brier.
Yeah.
And Fry was there with Melishuk playing third for him. And for me, I eventually went to the Granite Curling Club because I had some friends there, so I joined the juniors there. And that's when I kind of got serious about curling. And I changed my delivery. I went from the tuck delivery to a flat foot delivery. And it worked really well for me. I felt good. I felt like I could slide right at the broom, all sorts of good stuff like that.
Could keep your knee off the ice.
And my knee was never on, till many years later when then you kind of had to do that. But so I went over to the Granite, and that's where Terry Bronstein's curling. And
so how old would you be at this time?
Well, I started when I was 12 at the Winter Club, and so I was probably over at then at my time. I was like 15, so 15, 16, 17.
Were you still playing hockey at this time or other sports? Or were you
I hadn't. I basically stopped playing hockey after when we moved from moved to River Heights from St. James, because it was like junior high, and all my buddies that I played hockey with, they were back in St. James, and I was in River Heights, and I didn't know anybody that was playing hockey stuff. So I didn't get involved in it over there. At that point, I loved curling. I liked everything about the game, the thought process, everything about it. And because my dad was at Deer Lodge Curling Club, and I'd go the odd time with him and spare, and we'd be playing Jimmy Welsh or whatever. This is cool. This is Canadian champions, these guys. At the Granite that time, Ken Watson was curling at the Granite Curling Club then.
Okay. So how old would he have been at that point?
Oh, Ken, I'm guessing late 60s probably, something like that.
Yeah.
I'll show you later. I got a letter here from him in 1975. And Ken Watson, he wrote the books.
Yep.
And everybody
you had read the books at that point
Oh,
too,
sure.
probably, right?
Oh, I had them. I had all the books. Ken Watson on curling and all that. And he had a way of teaching, writing, because he actually was a teacher. That's what he started out as. Then he got into the insurance business later on. That developed from there. But so now I was playing, and my dad, I curled with him and actually full-time 1 year at Deer Lodge Curling Club. I went and played lead for him. And the cool thing about that year was, in 1961, we won the Grand Aggregate at Deer Lodge Curling Club. We won the first group at Deer Lodge Curling Club, and we won the club championship. And guess who we beat? All three of them. Jimmy Welsh.
Jimmy Welsh, who your dad had
never ever beaten.
Because he had the super lead.
Well, I don't know. Or maybe he got.
And you were still a junior. You're still a schoolboy
schoolboy age at that point.
Yeah. So I was like 18, whatever. Yeah. And then years later, about 7 or 8 years later, my brother John went and curled with my dad there, played lead, and they did the same thing. They won.
What's the age difference?
I'm 5 years older than John.
Okay.
Right. So, but he went, and they did the same thing, won all 3 of those things. So that was kind of cool. And then they've got the board at Deer Lodge, and you go in with these shields up, tells, every year. It's a cool thing because it goes right back into the 40s with club champions and all that. So anyway, that was kind of fun. And then all of a sudden, I get the call from Terry, and they needed me. So,
well, first off, so you got the nickname the Arrow. When did that come about? Had that already started to develop, or this was later?
It was actually it was Bronstein.
Okay,
Terry, Duguid, Turnbull. That they called me the rookie, and that was kind of when I started with them. Hey, rookies and that, and so on.
So you carried all the brooms. You had to.
Oh yeah. Well, just think about it. So So the first thing I'm going to is beginning of January. We're flying to Toronto. We're going to Maple Leaf Gardens to curl.
And have you played with these?
I'd played with them, in
the odd event, or
I started that year with them.
At the beginning of the season.
Yeah, 65, winter of 66, and so we played in a few things, and we did quite well. We won a cup, Transcona Cash Spiel, and stuff like that. But now I'm going to Maple Leaf Gardens to curl, and I walk into the dressing room, and I got my stuff, and there's the Richardsons.
Yeah.
Okay. There they are. There's Heck Gervais, Bud Somerville, Chuck Hay, Merv Mann. So I'm there, and I'm a junior kid saying, well, I said nothing. I was quiet as a mouse.
But you knew all these kids.
Well, I knew who they were.
Because you also came up loving this sport. You also read about it.
I knew about all these guys and what they'd done and this sort of thing. So I quietly put my shoes on and got all ready, and we went out and played, and it was an 8-team round robin. And we ended up at the end of the round robin in first place. We won 6 and lost 1 to Bud Somerville. That's the guy that Terry could never, ever beat, who beat him in the World Championship the year before. So then we went into the semifinal playoff, and we played Ernie Richardson, and he won. They played fabulous. They beat us. And so they went into the final against Gervais, and Richardson beat Gervais, and we played in the semifinal against, in the 3-4, against Doug Cameron from PEI, and we beat him. So we ended up getting third place in the thing. But for me, which was exciting for me, the biggest thing about that whole thing was they had an all-star team, Tournament Champions all-star team. So after it's all over, they're announcing the all-star team. And the all-star skip was Terry Bronstein, and Terry played great. The all-star third wasn't Duguid, which surprised me. It was, I forget who it was. He was playing third for Heck Gervais, and he was the all-star third. And then all-star second, they announced me. And I'm going, well, I'm here against, Sam Richardson and all these big-name players. And the neatest thing about that was the minute that they announced I was the winner, Sam Richardson walked up to me and said, "Hey, Arrow, congratulations." He says, "You were the best second man here," which I thought that was really classy because I never, like I said, I'm just in with these guys.
Yeah. So and he called you Arrow then, or that?
Yeah.
And that.
Yeah. Well, it started by then. Terry and Duguid and those guys started calling me the Arrow, and then so all those guys, as time went on, they kind of picked up on it too. Yeah. So. But that was a great experience at Maple Leaf Gardens. The other neat thing was the Toronto Maple Leafs were all watching us. They were getting ready to go on a road trip, and they were hanging around the boards.
So this would have been some of the guys on that.
These were the Stanley Cup winners.
Yeah.
That's how far back
we're going.
Yeah, we're talking, yeah. And it was Davey Keon, Johnny Bauer, Tim Horton, George Armstrong, all of those guys. And so after we'd finished, they said, well, let's go to the Hot Stove Lounge for a beer. So.
And you're what, like you're 19?
Oh, I'm like 20.
At this point, 20 years old.
20, 21.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we go to the Hot Stove Lounge, the old one, in the old Maple Leaf Gardens with Leafs, and we had a few beer with them, and then they took off, and that was that. And they haven't won the Stanley Cup since then.
Well, that's amazing. So I didn't even realize that tournament. I mean, that was like another mini Brier almost.
Well, it was huge. Event. It was 8-team invitational. Norm Houck won the first one, and he had Jimmy Ursel with him, and Morley Hanford, who played second. Morley Hanford was actually the guy that I copied my delivery off, was Morley Hanford. He had a flat foot, he threw it just like silk. And he played for quite a few years, and he ended up being the president of Imperial Oil Canada, Morley Hanford. And he kind of got out of the curling thing, but that was a heck of a team. that Haute team. They didn't win the Brier. They lost in the playoff, that three-way playoff in 62. But it was all invitational for that thing. But the problem was, they couldn't make enough money at it. So it ran for about 4 years, and then it kind of just disappeared. And then all the local, after that, a lot of these cash spiels started to spring up in different places. Clubs would run them to make money. So all of a sudden you ended up playing every weekend like they do now, going somewhere. Like in Winnipeg, we'd go down to Fort Francis every year, Grafton, North Dakota, Portage la Prairie, Kenora. The odd team would go to Regina or Moose Jaw and things like that. So it became kind of a circuit where if you went to Saskatchewan and played these guys, when you got to the Brier, it wasn't like you'd never seen them before. And you knew how to play them. At least you played them. That was a big advantage for us when we got together with Duguid, because he'd been at the Briers. He'd actually been at 3.
At that point. So take us back through it. So you started playing with your brother then at some point, right?
Well, yeah. What happened was I played with Terry and Ray Turnbull and Doogie, 66, 67, 68. And at that point, Terry, he was not happy at that point playing with Ray and Donnie. It just, it was one of those things where, okay, we had the run, and so that was the end of that. So I was, okay, fine, I'll find somebody. So Jimmy Pettipiece had moved from Saskatchewan about 2 years before, and he was playing with Hirsch Lerner. And so he was a friend of mine and member of the Granite Curling Club. So he and I just said, well, let's get together and we'll put a team in the men's league. And so who else we get? Well, my brother, John, who was just in university then, he'll play. And then we got Claire Payne, who used to curl out of Deer Lodge and Grain Exchange and stuff. He was a good player, Claire. So that was a team in at the Granite. No, actually, Claire wasn't with us. It was Brian Wood, my brother, Jim Pettipiece playing third, and myself skipping. And we played the Granite men's that year, and we won the Granite Curling Club Championship.
Which at that time probably was a tough club. I mean,
it was. I mean, there was like Bronstein, there was Duguid. They had their own teams. Gordy Lowry. There were a lot of good teams at the Granite.
I'm sure there's a handful of clubs at that time in Winnipeg that were super leagues unto themselves.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Strathcona, obviously, and then the Granite. The other one was Grain Exchange. Had a lot of good guys. Orest Melischuk played out of the Grain Exchange for quite a while. John Hanese. There was just a bunch of those guys. The DeBlonds they had their curling club. And so there were a lot of good players around. But
even when you start playdowns, you had to get out of that.
Get out of the Granite Curling Club because you'd have 64 teams, and they had like 5 spots into the city zones.
And you might have to beat a world champion on your
you had to beat somebody that either won a Brier or exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, we won the club championship that year, and
did that surprise you?
It didn't. Not really. I mean, we could play.
Yeah.
We were young. We were all young, and so we won the thing because we played well. And so
you didn't lack the confidence. You'd had the exposure. You'd played with these guys.
Played second with Terry, and I played against all the other guys. Yeah. So, and Jimmy Pettipiece had played in Saskatchewan and played some Bonspiels with Ernie Richardson and so on. Yeah. Brian Wood from Brandon had played in the Brandon area long time, good player. And my brother had played juniors in Manitoba. They lost the Manitoba High School final, and he was playing with Paul Devlin, playing third for Paul Devlin back in 65. So he'd played enough, and so we win the club championship.
And you had confidence at this point as a skip. You felt comfortable.
Yeah, I did.
And enjoy. And did you start to develop a strategy at that point around the game, or a thought process?
The strategy was basically what I'd watched everybody do. It was how they all played the game.
Yeah.
Corner guards, and make the other guy make a shot. It was pretty simple. I mean, Ernie Richardson one time said to me, he says, this is not a difficult game. He says, all you need to do is make a simple shot and let the other guy try and make the tough one.
Yeah.
He said, hit, lie to. It's amazing how many times the guy will hit and roll out, and you'll get one. So basically, my skipping was developed through watching Ken Watson and playing against Jimmy Welsh. There are a lot of guys around in Manitoba then. Billy Walsh from the Fort Rouge.
Yeah.
All the guys over at the Strathcona Curling Club, and you go play interclub against them. That's how you gain experience and you figure out how to play the game, because you're playing the guys that have won Briers and things. So because we won the club championship in 1969-70, we got the first spot out of the Granite Curling Club into city zones. We didn't have to play in the club.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So it helped you avoid playing 63 other teams.
That's right.
Yeah.
So my brother was going to law school, so he said, well, I'd rather not play. And said, okay, fine. So we picked up Claire Payne that year, the start of 69-70. And we went down to, played a couple of little Bonspiels. We went to Kenora, played in the Kenora Cash Spiel that year, and we didn't do well. And we came back from there, and we were in a club game. Club game was a crummy game. We didn't play well. We lost the club game. Next morning, Pettipies phones me and says, well, Claire Payne quit last night. I said, what do you mean he quit? Well, we were up having a beer, and he said, I quit. I'm leaving. And he said, and then Woody said, I don't care whether I play. I'm not going to play.
So
now
the mood on the squad right now is not good.
Well, no.
Yeah.
And so there's Jimmy and I, right? And I said, okay. So now the only way we can keep the club spot, we got to have three from last year's team. Yeah. So I phoned John and I said, how about coming and playing for us so we can keep the spot? And if we lose, you're done.
And this is 1969.
Yeah, that's right. And
fall,
this is December.
Getting into
this is December. Just about the first week in December. Yeah. Right now, there's not a lot of guys around that aren't playing. So John will play. That gets us our spot. So then the only other person that I knew that was a good player who wasn't playing, who had retired, was Don Duguid.
Yeah. And he was still relatively young.
He was 34. I mean, by today's standards, he was a kid.
Yeah.
But he'd retired already. So I phoned Doogie and I said, Doogie, here's the deal. I said, here's what happened, and we've got this spot out of the Granite Curling Club.
So if you didn't have that spot, maybe none of these conversations take place.
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
Absolutely wouldn't have, because I wouldn't have phoned him.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so he said, okay. I said, if we lose, then you can retire again. It's no big deal. Doesn't cost, you don't have to go play a whole pile of games. The first thing we played in was the Rossmere Cash Spiel between Christmas and New Year's. And we went and we won that thing.
And this was with John at the...
Well, because what happened was, okay, we're all going to get together, and Woody wasn't part of it. So Doogie is at the Granite Curling Club a couple of days after we'd had the discussion. And he runs into Woody in the washroom at the urinal and says, okay, Woody, why don't you come and play? Because he said...
Because at that point, Brian had said, I'm out.
That's right. Yeah. So they have a discussion, and all of a sudden Woody says, yeah, okay, I'm in.
Because John didn't really want to play. He focused on his studies.
He was law school. So he was fine with it. That was no big deal. So then we had Woody back.
So at some point or another, you got like a 6 or 7 man potential team here.
We had. Well, now we got extras. But So we played in the Rossmere Cash Spiel with Woody and Pettipies, myself and Doogie, and we won it. And then from there, we go in, and the rest is history. We won Manitoba.
Well, and I understand you lost the first game in the provincial.
We did
that year.
Yeah, we lost to Ross Fraser from Hamiota the very first game.
And how did it work there? Now, so you had to.
There were 2 groups of 8, A and a B, and it was a double knockout.
Mm-hmm. And you've lost your first game.
Yeah, 8 teams on this side, 8 teams on the other side. You lose, you're out. So we lost the first game, and then we won all in a row after that.
Yeah.
Down, and we won the, I think it was Harold Tanasichuk, I think was the guy that we beat to get into the AB final against Bob Friesen from Elmwood. And we won the first game, then we lost the second game, and then we won the third game. It was up in Dauphin. So, okay, we're going to the Brier, and it's in Winnipeg.
And maybe that might have did that attract Don at the time as well, to say, well, the Brier's in Winnipeg and you never know? Was that a conversation you guys had?
Actually, that wasn't even relative, because he was signed up. He was going to be a driver at the Brier.
Well, that's okay.
Okay, and in fact, he was
as a volunteer. Yeah.
Yeah, as he was going to be the Alberta driver.
Yeah.
Which was Heck Gervais. That was what the plan was.
Yeah.
So we win Manitoba. So now he can't be the driver, right? So they had to get somebody else. Yeah. And it turns out we're in Winnipeg at the arena. And the first game we played was Hector Gervais. And it was green ice, heavy, really heavy. And Hector basically couldn't get the rock down the other end, because the way he threw a rock, he came out and he pushed it. So if you're throwing that way and you're really heavy ice, you come out and you're almost stopped and you push it. You really can't push it hard enough. So back then, we all had backswings. I mean, and about Bob Pickering's backswing.
Yep.
Okay, so we could all throw weight, because it was backswing out on the ice, let it go. And so we could get rocks down to the other end. Plus the fact that both Woody and Jimmy were really strong sweepers. They were like linebackers on the front end. Those 2 guys, they could sweep. Anyway, we win the first game, and all of a sudden, wow, okay, we beat Hector.
And this was the first Brier in Winnipeg when, except for, it would have been almost 20 years.
I think 53 or something, around then.
And held in the arena.
Yep, Winnipeg Arena, yep. And it was full. On the Wednesday night, we weren't playing. It was Gervais playing Pickering, Saskatchewan, Alberta on the Wednesday night. David Stewart, the president, owner of Tobaccos, McDonald's Tobacco, they didn't even have a seat for him. He went to the game. It was that full.
He's the guy that gives out the trophy.
Yeah, in the big fur coat. Yeah. And he couldn't even sit down.
Yeah.
That's how many people, and we weren't playing.
And the local Manitoba team's not even represents something.
And then Friday, we end up on the Friday night, our last game, where we've got one loss. We lost to Lyle Dagg. It was a heck of a Brier. I mean, you had Pickering there, you had Gervais there, Lyle Dagg had won the Brier. We lost to Dagg in an extra end. We had last rock, and Duguid was short on a draw. So we lost that game. So now playing Pickering the last game of the Brier. And if we win that, we win the Brier. If we lose to Pickering, then we're going to be in a playoff against Gervais, Hector. Hector had lost 2. Anyway, it went right down to last rock, and Duguid made a hit. Just got it out. He wasn't one of his normal solid hits. He threw it, and actually he was shaky throwing it. I'm watching him come out, and his back leg was up in the air, and he let the thing go, an out-turn hit. And Woody started to sweep it, and Jimmy, who was the forward sweeper, he fell, and he went kind of like a crab over the rock.
Oh, actually fell
over top of it. Yeah, and good news was he didn't touch it, so Brian kept sweeping, and Duguid hit half the rock and rolled out, and we had a biter over on the side that won the Brier.
And there was, I think, 10,000 almost.
Oh, it was
people.
10,500. It was absolutely packed again.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest Brier ever. That one in Winnipeg in '70. They had over 60,000, and back then it went only from Monday to Friday. You didn't have the extra days. It was a 5-day thing. So you got over 60,000 people for 5 days.
And I heard that the celebration was quite something, and that actually Woody ended up disappearing after the celebration, or what was the...
Well, we were staying at the Fort Garry Hotel, so we won the thing. They give us the trophy, and now we go back to the hotel, and it was cool. Lyle Dagg came up, had bottles of champagne for us. He was a really classy man, Lyle Dagg, and he could play too. Anyway, so we get this back, and we're up in the room, and there's the party. And the press guys are there, Jack Matheson and Jack Wells and all those old guys. It was a blast, because the Brier right in Winnipeg, you win it, perfect. And so the party goes on, and then at some point in the night, Brian he was gone, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So anyway, so the thing is, they're going to have a reception on Sunday at the Granite Curling Club at noon for us. And so Saturday we get up, we're checking out of the hotel, and so where's Woody? Well, nobody seems to know. Where's Brian?
Yeah.
He's gone. Even Thelma, his wife, said, I don't know where he is.
Yeah.
He was with Jim Sparling and this about 3 or 4 other guys, friends of his. So Sunday morning, Duguid gets a phone call at home. And it was Woody, and he was in Kenora at the Kenrisha Hotel. And they'd gone there Friday night down to Kenora because there was some kind of a winter festival on.
Which, to explain, is about 2-hour drive.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
It's a good 2 hours, down to the Lake of the Woods. And
it'd be like just deciding at 3 a.m. from Edmonton, let's go to Calgary.
Yeah, that's right. It'd be fun. Why not?
Why not?
Yeah. So they were down there, and the thing is, they'd run out of cash, and so they couldn't pay for their hotel room because they didn't take a lot of cash with them, right? Yeah. Anyway, so Duguid got wired money down, and he said, Woody, you got to be at the Granite Curling Club. You got to be there by 1 o'clock because of this. We're having this reception, and he was there. He was there, but they went on a road trip. Yeah, to Kenora.
So was this something that you'd experienced from Woody before? Did he? Was he? No. Just it was a.
No, but the group of guys they were good guys. Jim Sparling and Jim McConnell. Jim McConnell was a lawyer and graduate law, and Bob McDonald, a bunch of these guys, and they had fun. They were good buddies.
Well, we all know that sometimes the best decisions aren't made, right? And
no, they're not.
The way things are.
I mean, it seemed like a good thing at the time,
right?
At the
time, sure.
Yeah, and in retrospect, it was. They had fun.
He got back on time.
Yeah, he got back. So anyway, and then from there we went.
You went to the Worlds at this. Now, so at that point, I want to kind of get a sense too. So Scotch Cup had started previously, then it became
Silver Broom.
Became the Silver Broom.
Yeah.
Did you guys have a sense of the Brier was the goal and the Worlds was an additional, or was Don in particular very focused to win it because of the?
Well, that's the key.
The one previously,
See, so
because you guys hadn't been there before.
We hadn't been there before, and in terms of me as a curler, when I was a kid, and I dream about, okay, winning the Brier, win the Brier, win the Brier. And so that is something that was always the key thing. That was the big deal. Mm-hmm. But the good news was the fact that Duguid had lost it, in 65, first Canadian team not to win the Worlds. Mm-hmm. He said, look, you guys, concentration. We're going there, and we're not going to lose a game.
Yeah, so I'm gonna run some scores by you, because I looked them up.
Yep.
And that 70 Worlds has got to be historic then. So it's played in
Utica, New York.
Utica, New York.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the ice was
It wasn't
good?
great, but it was all right.
It was manageable.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Germany.
Yeah.
Canada 20, Germany 4. Mm-hmm. Switzerland.
Yeah.
Canada 16, Switzerland 8.
Yeah.
Sweden, Canada 12, Sweden 4. Norway 6, Canada 14.
Yeah.
France, probably not known as a curling power, but still 16, Canada, France 5. And then in the finals against Bill Muirhead, Scotland, 11-4. So were you guys playing a strategy where Don just didn't want to have to throw the last rock, or were you guys focused that just...
We were okay, two things. We were focused, and to be honest with you, that team with the four of us, the 2 years that we played, which is the only 2 years that team played. Yeah. We did not lose a single game in 2 years where we got up 2 on anybody.
Oh, really? Well, Martin had a similar run there with Morris and that team recently, where they had, I think they'd lost 2 out of 100 and something games, but you guys were, so you would get up 2 and it was over. Yeah.
It's not like the Cubs and the Braves. It wasn't over till a fat lady sings. But in that year, like the first year that we played, which we started in kind of middle of December and won the Worlds, we were basically 56-2. The record for the whole year, and we won we won everything we were in for 2 years with CBC. Won it twice. Just everything we went in with that team, we dominated, and we played way before Martin started with these run backs and that. Yeah, we did that. We did it on one Bonspiel, that Rossmere Cashspiel, playing Bobby Robinson, who had won the Manitoba Championship the year before, and I'll never forget. They'd get one in around a guard, and we'd go up, bang the guard straight back onto theirs, leave ours guarded.
And that wasn't done at the time, was it? Like, was that?
No, but we did.
Unless there was no other option.
That's right.
You guys used this as more of a first choice.
Well, and it was really because Don Duguid was the best hitter I've ever seen of anybody that's ever played. His delivery, the way in turns, out turns, whatever he threw, it was up the stick. We were similar, he and I, okay? And so if I took a shot at it and I missed it by this much, half an inch or whatever, then we get a second go at it. It was absolutely dead.
And the two of you threw it so similar that there wasn't, you could
ice exactly where, and we had the sweeping. The other thing is we had Pettipies and Woody. It's like the sweepers today with the brushes. Those guys with corn broom, they were strong. So you could throw one right at the edge of the rock. As long as you threw it nice straight, it was almost automatic. And Bobby Robinson said, Alan Shinfield one point, he said, well, Bobby, let's just go around this one. Bobby said, no, we're not doing that, because they'll just knock that guard back and they'll be guarded.
So you've got the other team afraid to throw a come around.
He wouldn't play anything. They wouldn't play around. They wouldn't do it. And that's the way. So that was kind of the start. And the 2 years we played, we used that all the time. It was automatic or doubles. You give us a across the house double, we played those best of anybody at that time. We played Ron Northcott, and the Owl was a great strategist. But for us playing him, all we would do is make sure that we're playing Northcott, and Hector for that matter, is just make them have to make open hits. Don't give them any come-arounds and fancy little shots like that. And as long as you played them straight up and made them hit things, you could beat them. So it was how you played certain teams which really determined on how you do.
Did Don enjoy skipping? Because, I've read at times that maybe comments that he didn't enjoy it as much, or it wasn't really his favorite position.
Yeah,
which is amazing to consider the success you guys had.
Yeah, I think he probably preferred playing third, but because he played third for his brother when they had the Duguid team, 3 Duguids and Jack Robertson, and then he played third for Terry, and he skipped 1 year in the Manitoba Bonspiel, the 75th anniversary big Bonspiel, and he won the grand aggregate skipping with you wouldn't call it the best team ever, but they won it, and so he could play anywhere.
Yeah, sure.
And if he had a weakness, Doogie, the weakness was a draw. If he had to hit an eighth of a rock or half of a rock, either side, he would do that. It would be right there. So we'd be happy every time he had a hit. We're going to count. times when he had a draw, that might have been a little bit of a different deal. But he and the other guy that could really throw well was Jimmy Ursel. Jimmy was a lot like Duguid. I mean, they had the tuck delivery in that, but they had nice backswing out right at the broom, and rock was let go real clean. And we played one time in a Kenora Cash Bonspiel with Ursel, Duguid, myself, and Gord Lowry. And the only problem we had is that both for that Bonspiel, Ursel and Duguid couldn't draw.
Yeah.
If they could hit anything in sight, but if they had to make a draw, then it was questionable. But Don, he only really skipped, if you think about it, those 2 years. That was really it.
And I want to touch on a little bit on the 71 Brier, because that's got some interesting stories behind it. Although you guys were a powerhouse team, that was some things had gone differently that Brier. Pee Wee Pickering actually could have been the Brier winner that year. And they had a couple of losses where they lost to provinces that they wouldn't have expected to lose. Right? They lost to Quebec. I think it was Bill Odd out of Quebec, and they lost to PI in a couple of. And that was also an interesting Brier because there was big snowstorms. It was Quebec City, and so what do you remember from that event and kind of
there's a few things. First,
merry-go-round, I guess it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, there was another good lineup because Matt Baldwin was back from Alberta, and I remember thinking, well, Matt Baldwin's here, and he's 45, and is he ever old, right? And I'm going, but today, 45-year-old, there's all sorts of them playing in the top echelon. But Baldwin was 45, hadn't been in the Brier since 1958. This is 71. Okay, he's there. But they had a good team, and he could play. Pickering was there. It was the first time for Bill Tetley. He was there. And Duke Smale, who'd gone 9-1 in the Brier in 69 from BC and didn't win because Northcott went 10-0. So it was a good field. The problem with it was that after the 1970 Brier, the Canadian Curling Association decided we're convinced by Herbie Olson to sharpen the rock. So they took all the Brier rocks after Winnipeg and sharpened them and then shipped them to Quebec City.
Did they tell anyone?
We knew.
Okay.
No, we knew.
Well, if not, you were going to find out after the first game.
Well, it didn't take long because all of a sudden these rocks are just doing all sorts of weird things. There was one of them, it was kind of like an lopsided egg going down the ice, had a sharp edge. It would catch and then it would go this way. And depending on if you're going around a guard, if you get it to pivot at the right time, it would pivot right around the guard and be buried. Or it would pivot and be wide open. And so they were all inconsistent, all the rock. And so...
Well, how did they... so what did they do to sharpen at the time? What kind of technique?
Well, I don't know. I think Herbie put them... He was doing it to a lot of clubs back then in the 70s, as sharpening rocks. Convinced him he had to have them sharp. And those rocks were the really good one, Ailsa Craig, solid rocks. And really, they never ever have to be sharpened because you got two sides of the rock to use. And they're only used for the Canadian Championship. So that's
they're
like
only
a week.
One,
1 week a year.
Oh, okay, so these are the Brier rocks.
These are the Brier rocks.
Okay.
Yeah. So
they're not. It's not like they're in a club and getting used for 6-7 draws a day. Yeah.
No, they're not. So now, all of a sudden, at one point, Pee Wee Pickering said to the Canadian Curling Association, I said, I want to see whether it's your ice or the rocks. So they got club rock. They brought club rocks to the arena, and Pee Wee and Gary Ford went through a club rock, through the Brier rock. It was like night and day.
Yeah.
Club rocks were perfect, and they just performed the way they should. The other ones, not so much. So now, depending on what rocks you got when you were playing, it was a bit of a crapshoot to win. And it ends up that at the end of the Brier, we were 8-2. Tetley was 8-2, and Pickering was 8-2. So, interesting thing happens then. That's Friday night. The Brier rules say you got to play. Okay, draw straws. 2 are going to play. 1 gets a bye.
Oh, on the Friday night you have to play.
And you're going to have on Friday night.
How many draws had you already played that?
Well, we played 2 for sure. I mean, in the Brier you played 12 ends, 2 games a day, and some cases 3 games a day. So the deal was we drew the straws and we got the long straw, so we got the bye. And Pickering had to play against Tetley.
Yeah.
So fine, supposedly they're going to play right away. CBC goes to the Canadian Curling Association and says to them, if you leave the playoff and if you have the first playoff game tomorrow morning and then schedule the final game for 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Saturday afternoon, we'll televise the Brier game, the final game, the full game.
Which had never been done.
Had never been done.
They'd always sort of piece together
they had
show
highlights in that.
Because there wasn't a playoff unless...
That's right.
Unless a playoff occurred.
Yeah.
Naturally through ties like this. Okay.
So CBC said that, and the CCA said, okay, we'll do that. Well, the other issue then was there was a person by the name of Johnny Esau at the Brier from CTV. And CTV had a thing called the Wide World of Sports every weekend on Saturday afternoon. So Johnny Esau and CTV had been there filming the Brier the whole week, games, and they had put together a 1-hour show for Wide World of Sports.
Okay.
They can't show it because...
It's not over.
It's not over.
And CBC
is doing it live.
Is scooping them and doing the...
That's right. Well, so what Esau said, right there, he said, that's it. You'll never see CTV at the Brier again.
Okay.
And they took and they left. And that's when he started, Johnny Esau. He was the guru of Canadian figure skating. If you remember, CTV did all the figure skating. And he was the big wazoo with figure skating. And they never came back.
Largely because just the...
Well, because of what had happened with CBC getting the live
And do you think
telecast.
that's why CBC made that play with
well, I know. I think that CBC, they were into curling because they had their cross-Canada curling and that. So they were doing some of it. And the ratings for the Brier were big. And they still to this day. They're huge for television. So they decided that they would bring the crew in and do the whole Brier final, which we did. And we ended up winning it. It wasn't much of a game, but I was surprised actually that Pickering had lost to Tetley. But Bill Tetley, and he won the Brier in 75, and I was at that Brier, I was skipping. Tetley was kind of sneaky good. His hits were just like cream puffs. Yeah. Just enough to get the rocks out. But
so he had various levels of hack weight.
Oh, yeah. And the team worked, that team when they won in 75, that was a good team for him, the way he played.
Yeah.
And it was the 75 Brier. I went down there. There was Ursel, and there was Harvey Mazinke, ourselves, Paul Savage, a lot of good teams there. And I had Mike Riley playing third for me in that Brier. We had a good team, Brian Wood and Doug Holmes. And we went down there. We beat Harvey Mazinke about 11-3 or something. We beat Ursel right the very first game. So we beat the guys that we had, right?
I think Art told me the story about that game against Ursel, where Ursel took out his own rock or something.
Well, yeah, it was. It wasn't
sometimes
a good
strange
game
things
for him.
happen.
Oh,
right?
they do.
Yeah.
And he
wasn't sure if you'd remember that story.
No, I do, and I also remember missing on CBC Cross Canada Curling a wide open hit against Jimmy Ursel, and the final rock. Yeah, I put it back a bit and it ran
and
straight.
Gave it back to him there.
Yeah, and so we won $8,000, and he won $16,000.
So it all seems to come around. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And Jimmy and I were always good friends. We were always good friends, and I curled for a couple of years with him when he moved back to Winnipeg. But at that point in 71, all of a sudden we win the Brier again. And it was the Brier that nobody was at.
Okay.
Lowest attendance ever.
So you've got Winnipeg the year before.
With the biggest ever. And now, and the other one there.
Go to Quebec City in a snowstorm.
That's right. And so Doogie says, and Donnie had a good sense of humor. He'd say, well, let's see, because they usually introduce, the curlers, right, to the arena crowd. And Doogie'd say, well, you should forget about that. Why don't we introduce the fans in Section 8, Row 10, Seat 5? Yeah.
So he had his broadcast voice already.
Oh, sure. And there were less people.
Then there were more competing in the event, more curlers, and if you took away the curlers and the curlers' relative, spouses,
there'd be nobody there.
Yeah.
Because right next door, the arena beside us, was a guy who was playing junior hockey for the Ramparts. His name was Guy Lafleur. And we come to the Brier, and the parking lot's full. We go, wow.
Everyone's here to see us.
No, they're not. No, they're in the other arena.
Yeah.
So that was and then that snowstorm was a ridiculous thing. It was Thursday. We got up Thursday morning, and the shadow front, the front door, the snow was halfway up the front door. And so there was nobody around, no Brier officials, CCA guys to make a decision. So the only person there was the guy in charge of transportation for the Brier. Okay, we're going. So we get in our cars and we get to the rink.
Are there any other cars out on the...
No.
At this point? No.
Okay. So we get to the rink and we play our game. We get finished that. Now there's no way we can get back.
Yeah.
Because you're stuck. And Pickering, he had the bye in the morning. So he was supposed to play in the afternoon. So they got a hold of snowmobile and with a sled behind and fired these guys out.
Drag them out there.
And they get to the rink, and they're soaking wet, and they're like 15 minutes late.
Oh, yeah.
And so the Brier guy says, well, hurry up, get in there, get ready, get out, or we're going to start hanging up points on you. Well, you don't want to know what Pickering said to the guy.
I'm sure there was a few four-letter expletives at that point.
Yeah. We'll be there when we're good.
And this is a CCA official?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So the legacy of the CCA goes back many, many years.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Anyway, so they finally we got all the games done that day, and they had to bring a City of Quebec snowplow along with transit buses behind the snowplow out to get all of us, and also the fans that were there, right? Yeah. All 50 of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
That made it out for them.
And then so we get on these transit buses, they charged us. We had to pay for the ride on the transit bus to get us back to the hotel.
So you had to make sure you had the right amount of change. They probably
it was, I didn't have any tickets for the Quebec Transit, but so anyway, that Brier was just, there was so much about it that was just weird.
Yeah, it sounds like
it really was, and we go to the Worlds that year in Megève, France, and
Now at this point, so were you guys sensing that this run was going to be over, or was there had Don already talked about I'm not going to play next year? Where was things at from the team dynamic? Because
we were still going to be playing at that point. Won the Brier, and when we were over in Megève in France and for the World thing, and it was about halfway through that, and he was getting out of the car to go to the rink, and he said, I don't think I'm going to play next year. This is it, right? So that was the first I'd heard of that. Okay, fine. So we continue on, and we won that World thing undefeated too. So we
didn't impact the team dynamic at that point.
No,
clearly,
no. And so we had won the Worlds, and it was 17 straight wins with no losses.
Yeah.
Which, and in all of the international games that I've had, I've never really lost to anybody outside of Canada. That was something that we were, as a team, we were happy of. And we're still the only one that's done that, 17 straight wins. But so fine. So then he finally decided. He said, "No, I'm not going to play. So I'm going to retire." A couple of years later, he had second thoughts about that, and we talked about it.
Because at that point, he's still only about, 36, 37?
He was 36.
Yeah.
And so what happened was, 72, we got to get somebody to fill in for him. So Jimmy Pettipiece knew Danny Fink from Saskatchewan.
Okay, yeah.
The Fink brothers, and George.
But at that point, he had played he's in Saskatchewan. This is where he's in, living, working, and curling.
So the person that we talked about maybe Barry Fry. Mm-hmm. Because we had Fry fill in the Heather Carr Bonspiel at the start of the year, the second year we won, for Duguid, because Duguid was away on business in Toronto. And so Fry skipped our team. We went through undefeated. We won the Cars. We beat Mellischuk in the final. So Fry would have worked. But we kind of talked about a lot of stuff, and then the thought was, I said, look, I'll phone George Fink, who's in Calgary, who'd played with Northcott, played third, won the Brier with Northcott, a really good player. And I phoned George, and George said, no, he was just getting into his business career at that point. And in fact, today, George Fink is one of the wealthiest guys in Alberta in oil and gas business. Mm-hmm. Pine Top Energy he owns, which just a year and a half ago bought all the gas fields all around Viking here.
Okay. Yeah.
And even Ron Northcott says George, because George Fink's got to be late 70s now, is just involved in business and really good at it.
Still.
Yeah. He's well respected, well liked, and in that business in Alberta, he's one of the top guys. Yeah. Anyway, I'd phoned George, and I really would have liked to have had him come and play, but he said no. But he said, why don't you phone my brother Danny? Because Danny is in Regina, and he's not stuck with anything right now. He's not married and blah blah blah. So I phoned Danny. I said, well, come on down, have a visit, and see what we can do.
At this point, were there a lot of guys that were making kind of life choices to move provinces in terms of curling? Not that wasn't common, right?
No.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it unless you did it. You had to move before August 1st that year. Mm-hmm. If you didn't, you couldn't play. Anyway, so Danny came down, and he met a bunch of people and stuff, and we ended up getting him a job. Cal Coulter owned Kennedy Floorings, and Cal Coulter was a good buddy of Duguid's. And so, okay, Danny needs a job. So Cal hired him, worked at Kennedy Floorings at accounting and stuff. And so he's got a job. I knew Bill Lount Construction, and they owned a bunch of apartment blocks on Portage Avenue. So we got him an apartment. There was a couple of very nice ladies that were, that were pretty and so on. We had a couple of dates and stuff. So he liked being there, and so he moved Regina to Winnipeg and curled with us that year. And that year we won the CBC curling with him skipping, and then we got to Virden for the Manitoba Playdowns. Got down to the semifinal, and we played Orest Mellischuk, 2 games, because we were on both sides, he and I. And we lost 2 games to Mellischuk, extra and last rock. And then we were gone, and Mellischuk won the Brier, and won the World.
Yeah, went on. That was the famous Labonte curse. And
that's right.
All that, yeah.
So we were that close to winning third year in a row.
What was Orest like at that time?
I always liked Orest. He was gruff. And,
I think he almost kind of plays up. Well, when I knew him, and I actually went to school with his son, Sean, and it was interesting how I don't know if he played up to that persona a little later.
I think he did.
Those guys, colorful character for sure.
Johnny Usakis, Orest Mellischuk, Bobby Lefsko.
And they bark at each other as much as they bark at anybody else.
Oh, sure. They were always fun, and I always enjoyed them. But
were you guys like that, or you guys were like when you guys played together with Don and that, or even with your other teams? You were probably more subdued.
We were more subdued. Doogie had a good sense of humor, and he was actually quite funny, and he'd crack guys up and stuff. But the rest of us weren't really like that. But so Mellischuk wins. Then the next year with Danny, we won Manitoba, and we had pet apiece. And my brother joined us because Woody decided he didn't want to play. So 73, we beat the DeBlonds in the Winnipeg Arena and went to the Brier in Edmonton.
Well, but Woody ended up with lots of Brier.
Oh yeah,
lots of hearts anyway. I don't think he needed that.
Well, no.
That would have been too many.
He came back in 75 and played for me, and we went to the Brier, and then he played with Fry and Doug Harrison. Yeah. So
I think did he go to more Briers in the 70s than?
He went. Yeah, he was in 5. He went to 5. I went to 4. He went to 5. But he loved playing lead, and he was at that position the best there was.
So why take a year off then?
Oh, he skipped his own team in 73. Okay. Yeah. Out of Brandon, and he was in the Manitoba Playdowns. He won a spot,
which was probably at that time rare for a lead to have that kind of ability.
Yeah,
was it? Like usually the lead was more of a glue guy, somebody that really was strong. Sweeper was probably more important than anything at that point, wasn't it?
Well, it was huge.
Yeah,
but the thing with our team was we were solid from lead to skip. We were about the first in Manitoba, other than Norm Houck with Jimmy Ursel, Morley Hanford, Ross Murdoch. That team was four solid guys.
Yeah, 4 guys that could skip. Kind of.
Yeah, they could. Yeah, you could move them wherever you wanted. It's like Pickering with Garnet Campbell and Jack Keys. All 3 of those guys skipped that team in Briers. So our team was solid like that, and it made a big difference. And teams then started getting solid teams, like Mellischuk's team was, Fry's team was, all those guys. And 73, we beat the DeBlonds and went to the Brier, and we won our first 4 games at the Brier, 4-0. And then we lost the ones after that. But here's the other interesting thing. You remember the Rocks from 1971?
Yeah.
Mellischuk went to St. John's, Newfoundland in 72. And one of the guys, by the name of Bob Cole, the hockey broadcaster, was a Newfoundland skip in 71 in Quebec. He had played with these Rocks, with Sharpened. He was in charge of the Brier in 72 in Newfoundland. No CCA Rocks. He wouldn't let them on the island.
So he made that choice.
Yes, and they used local club Rocks. And the Brier was wonderful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we go fast forward to 73, and the Brier's in Edmonton. We go up there, and guess what we're welcomed with? The Briers from 1971, Quebec City hadn't been
even used since, so they hadn't been worn
They had them
in
Edmonton,
and
Herbie Olsen was the ice maker.
Because if anything, these Rocks probably needed about 1,000 games to get them.
Oh, yeah, they could have been used forever and not hurt them. So now so the Brier in Edmonton, same thing. They got these Rocks back, and we won our first 4. The ice was kind of heavy then until it got broken in, and we motored these guys. Then all of a sudden, the ice got to be more normal, and then the Rocks started doing things. So we lost our fifth game to to Mazinki on a double extra end. Okay, so that was our first loss. Then we played Melwachorn, Alberta, lost them on a double extra end. Okay, so
now it wasn't that common to have that many double extra
14
ends. Usually somebody's going to score.
2 games in a row, 14 ends.
Yeah.
And on one of the things with Watchorn, there was a rock. We didn't know whether it was in the rings or not. So you take the 12-foot, and we go to put it down in the middle of the ring, and there was no hole there. Okay.
There's no hole.
There was no hole. Yeah. So okay. Now, so where do we put this?
Device. They had
got it.
That.
They got it, but
no one had actually.
Kirby Olsen hadn't put the hole in the ice.
Yeah. On any of the sheets, I assume. Then. Okay.
Yeah. So Wally Urslack was the umpire. He comes wandering down, and Wally says, "Oh, okay." So he puts the stick down, and then he steps on it. Punches it in the ice, right? He goes like this around, and the rock's in.
Yeah.
And they win. Because I'd looked at it, the rock is out.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother, Stan John, the lawyer, was one of his very first things in Alberta where he had conversations with officials in Alberta, curling, was there. He said to Wally, you can't do that, Wally. You're this far away from where the tape is.
Yeah, so he wasn't actually on the...
No, he wasn't.
Yeah.
And it was towards where the rock was.
Yeah.
He says, that's no good. You can't do that. And Wally looked at him and said, I'm the umpire. I decide. And that was that.
And that was that.
Yeah. So Mazinki won that, Brier.
Yeah.
He didn't even have to, on Friday, he'd already won it. So that was 73. And then in 74, I actually had Mike Riley, Doug Holmes, and got Brian Wood back. And we got to the Manitoba Playdowns. We lost, I forget who we lost to in the Winnipeg Arena, but that was that. And then the next year, with that team, we won Manitoba again.
And so they had started doing the provincial playdowns at that point in the Winnipeg Arena.
Well, it was every year alternate. And they did that even in the 60s. You know, Terry Bronstein, 65, won in the Winnipeg Arena, the Manitoba Championship.
Yeah.
And so then you'd go out to the country the next year, which next year was
in a
Dauphin.
Club or an arena, or how would they?
Well, we went to Dauphin. They played in the Dauphin Arena.
Yeah.
Went to Verdun in the Verdun Arena, Keystone Center in Brandon, and we went to Flin Flon one year in 76. The only time they've ever gone up there, and they chartered a plane, Transair, for the curlers to get up there. And the problem with that was when you got knocked out of the Brier or out of the playdowns in Manitoba in Flin Flon, you couldn't get home.
So you were waiting there the whole time.
Yeah,
to get
and that was probably the biggest party that's ever been seen in curling history.
Really?
Well, but all these guys they're out. There's 30,
they're out. They got no reason
teams.
They got no reason to abstain.
No, and
at this point,
and there's only 2 teams playing. Bronstein was playing De Blonde in the Manitoba final. They were the only ones left. Melishchuk, Fry, Usakis, us, everybody was out. Yeah. And that was the time we had Don Jonas, the quarterback for the Bombers. So
there's no stories you can tell from that then that wouldn't get people into trouble. I mean.
No, they're the best left untold. It's sort of like Las Vegas.
What happens in Flin Flon stays in Flin Flon in 1976.
Exactly. So, but it was an experience, and they haven't done that, gone back up there since. But they're still in Manitoba. They still go in and out of the city. Yeah. And so 75, and around that year, about 75, 76, and Duguid at that point said, I really, I probably shouldn't have quit.
Yeah, so he started having...
He said, because, I look at...
Second thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, he said, because if I'd been there instead of Danny, 73 against Melishchuk...
Well, it was a little bit like if in, I guess, 86, the Oilers had just said, you know what, Gretzky just said, I don't want to play hockey anymore, and walked away from... Yeah. You guys had an incredible team that, as you mentioned, incredible record.
Because we kept winning even for that period from 70 to 76.
Yeah. You're having success. And,
4 out of 6 years won Manitoba. Mm-hmm. But anyway, it woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
If the dog hadn't stopped to take a pee, and could have caught the rabbit.
Yes.
So
is that a Manitoba term? Because for some reason I've heard that.
Well, I've heard. Yeah. No, that's.
A few different guys used to tell that one. Yeah.
They all did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other thing with the curling club is if.
Yeah.
And a lot of the clubs back in the old days, and when you walked out of the rink back into the curling club area, over the door was the words if.
If.
Yeah. And always remember that.
So at this point, Don's starting to have second thoughts. So
never. And he, well, you know what? He actually, when I was skipping, he came and played he went to Grafton with us because Mike Riley couldn't go. So Doogie came down to Grafton and had Woody, and we won the Grafton Cash Spiel. He played in a couple of Bonspiels, played third for me. And we won a couple of things, and he could play.
Yeah, so he could come out and just,
he could play.
Not even with having the track record over the season, he'd come out and he could
play. He was that kind of a player. He could just go out and play. And even years later, I moved back to Winnipeg in 2000 for 1 year. My dad wasn't well, so moved back from Edmonton. And I played at the Granite, and the team was Bronstein. Well, it was Barry Fry was the skip. Third was Duguid. At second was myself, or Terry Bronstein, or Bill Hodson from Tetley's team.
So this is a who's who.
And the lead was Ray Turnbull.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, it was.
So
I
can just imagine that the best part of those games was probably sitting around the stories after.
Oh, yeah.
Because probably at that point, you probably forgot some of the stories, so they were funnier
than
they were when you'd heard them 7. Because when you play, I've always felt this, if you got, usually what breaks up teams isn't so much personalities, although that can be part of it, but sometimes it's just you're tired of hearing the same old stories because you got the same, it's a small team, right? And same stories over and over again. But I want to touch on it because I just want to ask a question. Because I'd heard this growing up in Manitoba, and I just rereading it, I spotted it in Bob Week's books, and there's a little line about, the great Duguid rink of that era in 70-71, that maybe there were some other things at play around either personalities clashed or there was a shoe contract or some of these things. Was there something else that led to it? Or because it doesn't sound like it in terms of the stories you're saying.
That didn't
rumors.
That didn't lead to the team not playing.
Because it did sound like Don just was done.
He was. It was simple. He was done.
Yeah.
I mean, there was the shoe thing.
So what's the shoe thing?
Well, the shoe thing, very simply, was at the time that we were winning, I was working for the Riley family in Winnipeg, and they owned a company called Dominion Tanner, manufactured leather. And they had 3 plants, one in Toronto, one in Winnipeg, one in Edmonton. Sold leather to Greb Shoe, and Greb Shoe owned Bauer Shoe at the time, who made skates, made sporting kind of shoes. So at that point, we just won the Brier and won the Worlds, and so I would call on Frank Ogradnik, who was a designer for Greb and Bauer in Winnipeg. And at that point, Bauer came out with first year calling a jog shoe. They had a jog shoe.
Okay.
And there was you could buy a white pair, you could buy a red pair, green or blue. And they were low cut, kind of like, sort of like Adidas, but not, but that style. Okay, so I said, Frank Ogradnik, I said, Frank, you guys have an opportunity here because nobody makes curling shoes.
So at that point,
there weren't any curling, other than Ernie Richardson curling boot, which was a high top boot with sheep lining. It was
really okay.
Yeah, Ernie Richardson curling.
I can't imagine throwing tuck with a high top. That would have been
exactly. And a lot of guys used felt boots, black felt boots, and some of them, like Barry Fry, they call him a snake. He had these '60s shoes that were long, narrow things with a toe that kind of pointed up.
Oh yeah.
And then he played with those. So nobody had an athletic-looking curling shoe at that time. So the second year that we played together, Frank Ogradnik, I said, just put a Hush Puppy sole on your jog shoe. Take the jog shoe sole off, put a Hush Puppy sole on it, and then line the thing. It's the same pattern with your dye and the same leather, the same everything. So in the winter, instead of making jog shoes, you make curling shoes. And so that year we had the World Championship and the Brier. Each of us had a pair. Doogie had white, I had red, I think Jimmy had green, and Woody had blue.
That's in 71.
71.
Yeah, the Brier that unfortunately no one saw.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So not the best marketing opportunity necessarily.
No.
It would have been great to have them the year before in Winnipeg.
It would have been.
Quebec City was...
And there weren't a lot in Megève, France either. Although they televised the thing. So we were on TV for the World Final, and the shoes were, you could see those. And they took off. I mean, people, hey, those are cool. They look good, comfortable, and so on. And people to this day still, you go to these curling rinks, you'll see guys wearing those shoes from the 70s. They've still got them. Anyway, fine. So talked to Donnie Bauer, who was the vice president of Bauer Shoes, and he said, well, we're going to produce these things, and if your team endorses them, then we'll pay you royalty every pair we sell. Okay,
that's they understand at that point what that opportunity might have been, royalty, because maybe they didn't even.
Well, no, they knew, and it was a good thing. I mean, they sold lots of those shoes. And so they made it, but they wanted a deal just with Don. And I was fine with that because, I mean, I'm selling them the leather. I'm involved with the business.
So you even felt like maybe this isn't a...
Yeah, a little bit of a conflict and it works this way. Because they'll pay him and then he'll split the money. And he did at the start. We each got a check in the first 10,000 pair they sold and so on. But then after that, we weren't getting any checks. I mean, and I knew how many pairs they were making because I'm selling them the leather. I know what. So okay, and
this is at this point now. This is years later, or this is.
Well, this is like 73, 4, 5, right? And so eventually, I said to Woody and to Jimmy, I said, well, we should do something about this because if we don't, then it's just going to continue. And anyway, so what we did is we got a hold of a lawyer and we went after him for the money. And it ended up going to court, and it ended up we lost in the Court of Queen's Bench on the decision. And the guy that we had as our lawyer, Dick Scott, he was upset. He said, no, that's bad. He says, the judge was wrong, so we're going to appeal this. And I said, yeah, well, that's just going to cost us more money. And in an appeal, you cannot introduce any more evidence. The appeal court looks at the trial judge and the trial transcripts, and they decide if the trial judge erred in law, made an error. So we go to the appeal court, and Dick said, we'll know within a minute of whether we won or not. Okay. So we go to the appeal court, and these 5 judges sitting up on the bench, and Judge Friedman was the Chief Justice, and Hall, and there's a bunch of them. And so Nusgard, I forget his first name, but he was Doogie's lawyer. Doogie wasn't there. It was myself and Dick Scott and Woody and Jimmy. And so Sam Friedman starts to talk, and Nusgard said, well, Your Honor, the money should all be going to Duguid because if he walks down the street in Winnipeg, he said, everybody knows who he is. And he said, and if the other guys are walking down the street, nobody knows who they are. And then Sam Friedman, I'll never forget, he's an older guy, he's looking over his half glasses, and he said, Mr. Nusgard, I would.
So bad opening.
All he said. Well, right there, Dick goes, and we won.
Yeah. Now, so at that point, were you still seeing Don at the Granite from time to time? Was the relationship between you guys?
I didn't see a lot of him because he wasn't
because he wasn't really curling much. But
wasn't curling.
But you even mentioned so around that time he'd even played with you in a Bonspiel.
Yeah.
But so did you guys still have a friendly relationship? I guess during that point in time because it's unfortunate. And by the way, this isn't unique to your situation. I mean,
no, I know
friendships and money can often create rifts.
It really wasn't bad. I'm not going to talk to you, that kind of stuff, because we ended up later on playing in the 100th Manitoba Bonspiel.
Because so you had the reunion team.
Sure, we got all together.
I want to go into it a bit about the MCA. I think you recorded one time too about talking about what an important event I think it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in the 100th, so that was the first time you guys had gone out.
That we played as a team since we'd won the Worlds in Megève, France.
Since France, okay,
yeah. Doogie had played with myself and Mike Riley and that, but as a team, those 4 guys, that was the...
that was 1988. 88, yeah. That was my first MCA, so...
Oh, okay.
Well, I was actually still in junior, but we played in that one.
Yeah.
I played with James Kirkness and...
oh, sure, yeah. I know that, yeah.
And it was interesting because I had grown up at the Assiniboine, and I was always a flat footer.
Yeah.
So you'll appreciate this, but I always grew up a fan of Kerry
Burtnick and
so
that team.
I fiddled around with a tuck slide, and actually I skipped one game sliding tuck and I actually had my Ray Bourque Boston Bruins jersey, that was kind of thing. And it was interesting because I remember winning as a skip as a tuck slider, and I thought maybe I should stick with that. And then I realized I don't think this is gonna. I had you talk about your knee hitting the ice. I mean, I had a lot of problems with the knee going all over, but so that must have been a pretty special event for the 4 of you guys. I mean,
it was. And the funny thing about that was first of all, they had 1,200 and some teams in it.
Yeah.
The Manitoba Bonspiel, and that was the 100th. The first Manitoba Bonspiel I ever played in was in '63, and that was the 75th anniversary. And I played with Reverend Donald Bruce McDonald, who was a United Church minister.
So there weren't as many drinks after the game then, or was
he actually liked he liked the rye.
Right.
And he was a great man.
Because if there's one thing the MC is known for, it's also a social event. It's competitive because
absolutely.
Oftentimes teams are playing to get through it and get into the provincials, but it's it's a social experience.
So many teams, and you're all over the city and so on. But so,
how'd you do that first year in '63?
We got down to about the eighths of an event.
Okay.
Donald Bruce's son, Ian McDonald, was a good player, and he was on the team. He and I were the same age, and then Donald Bruce's brother from Hartney came in to play. So it was our team, and I don't know, we probably played a dozen games.
Yeah.
Didn't win anything, but it was, I loved it. And then, so 100th anniversary was the next sort of significant one. And I was actually supposed to be playing.
But you had some success in a couple.
Oh, yeah. No, and I played in most of them in between, right? But by 88, I was in Alberta. I'd moved in 84 to Edmonton. I actually had a different team set up. It wasn't going to be our team that won the Worlds.
Okay.
It was going to, originally, myself and Bob Cole from Hockey Night in Canada, because I phoned Bob. Turned out he was going to be around Winnipeg, Manitoba Bonspiel that year, and he says, I'll get our friend Andy. That was Andy Van Hellemont, the referee, because Andy's from Winnipeg. His older brother was the guy I played with Terry when he was 15 in the Brier.
So that was actually his older brother. Okay.
Yeah, so Andy is the NHL referee guy.
Okay,
and Andy could play. Andy lost to Manitoba High School a couple of times, skipping out of the Thistle Curling Club. So it was going to be Bob Cole, myself, Andy Van Hellemont, and I was going to get one other guy from Winnipeg to play. And so that was set up.
Because there was a lot of buzz about that event then, clearly.
Oh, it was huge, yeah. And Andy had scheduled hockey NHL games that he would be in Winnipeg doing a game here and a game on each end of the MCA Bonspiel.
Yeah, because I mean, that was so with that many teams, right? If I recall, I mean, it started on a
Wednesday and it went till the next Thursday.
Yeah.
So that was going to be it. But then all of a sudden, then the MCA wanted to have us together for their 100th anniversary. So Duguid.
So it wasn't like the four of you guys were necessarily thinking of that at the time.
No, and Don wasn't really playing.
Yeah.
So we all got together, and basically I skipped and I threw last rocks, and Pettipiece threw third, and Woody second, and Duguid threw lead. And we won a bunch of games.
Yeah.
The one place where we really shone was we had a game at Assiniboine Memorial, and we were playing the defending European champion, and they were from Switzerland, the Swiss team. And so that's fine. And the driver for the Swiss team was a guy I knew from Deer Lodge Curling Club. And he came up to me, and he said to me before the game, he said, I hope you guys can stay with these guys. I said, Jack, I'll tell you what, we'll stay with them, and it'll be over early. We beat them in 4N. It was just, we got 4, we stole 3, we got 2, stole 4.
You guys were all still in pretty good shape then.
We could still, Don was a little bit. You know what? Yeah, and it was one of those things where it's kind of like, okay, try and test us. Not a good thing, because now we're going to concentrate. And so anyway, we won that, and we won a bunch, and eventually we lost, but it was a lot of fun. And then I didn't play. That was the 100th. The last one I played in was the 125th.
So you went back,
2013, and got myself with John Bubbs and Bob Jenyon and my son-in-law who lives in Beausejour. He was the sweeping young guy on our team, right? And I took Vern Hafso from Viking, who was Alberta high school champ in '65. Took him down there for the Manitoba Bonspiel. I said, you've got to come and experience this. Because there's nothing in the world like the Manitoba Bonspiel. We went down, and they had 500 and something teams. So we ended up getting to the semifinal of one event, and we played the Bone Twin. I don't know if they lost the final to Burtnick a couple of times in the Manitoba thing. So our old team, we got down, and we actually were in the semifinal and won a prize. And so we were at the Fort Rouge is where we lost, so we went and had a beer. At that point, we said, okay. And Bubsy said, well, we're not going to play anymore until the 150th. He says, we're not entering, we're saving ourselves. We'll play in the 150th. I said, that's the deal.
All right.
I said, but we're going to have to get somebody younger than my son-in-law, because he'll be too old then. So that was the last arrangement was we'll play in the 150th. We'll all be in our 90s. Well, anyway, so that was the last MC Bonspiel I played in.
It's quite the event. I mean, it's shifted, and now it's it's mixed and women and juniors, and they've had,
well, they've had to do changes, and that year I played, I had a long sit down with Resby Coots. Mm-hmm. I think I told you about it. We ended up playing his son.
Oh, I read Resby's article on it.
Yeah, and we sat behind the glass, Resby and I, and had a fun. We just had a great visit, and those guys were out playing and knocking themselves off, and. But I enjoy that. What I enjoy with curling is the people that I've met over all the years, and we're still friends. I mean, Ernie Richardson, Northcott, those guys. We're members of the Governor General's Curling Club. So they have golf tournaments every year, and depending on where it is, I'll go or not go. And you get together with them. It's fun. And the best thing about the friendships you've got them like forever, and they don't go away. We had a Hec Gervais, after he passed away, Bill Tainch and Ron Anton put together a golf tournament to raise money to Hec Gervais Scholarship Fund. They invited me. I went. I was there. Matt Baldwin, Ernie and Sam Richardson came from Saskatchewan. We played golf. After the banquet and stuff, Wes Montgomery, the reporter, he sat down with us. He said, "I'm just going to sit and listen." Mm-hmm. And it was really cool because, I mean, there's, Ron Anton that played with Hector. I was there, Matt Baldwin, Ernie Richardson, Sam Richardson. And if you put Sam Richardson in a mix.
Well, I heard Sam and Matt were two storytellers.
Yeah. So it was just hours and hours of just talking about, all the different experiences, and it was just fun. But that's the good thing about curling, and even to this day, I played against the very first ever world curling champion competitively, which was Ernie Richardson, right? Mm-hmm. And pretty much, if you go over this period, I probably played against competitively over half of the guys that have won world championship.
Yeah, point or another.
Point or another. I mean,
because you came out to Alberta, and then you continued to play.
I didn't play much. I played with Tony Rankel, and I skipped Tommy Reed's team a couple of times, and we won a couple of cash spiels in Edmonton. But I was in business. I was running a business. We had over 100 employees running the plant. So, and it was difficult when you move like that and you really don't know anybody. The only ones I knew were Tony Rankel and Tommy Reed because I played them in the 75 Brier. So I played a bit with those guys. And then eventually Les Rogers moved from Saskatchewan to Edmonton, as you know, because I think you played with him at some point. But
yeah, I can't blame Les.
No, and it was great, and we had good success with Les. We actually almost won Alberta Seniors in 2003. We lost Tommy Reed, beat us the first game, and then Tommy Reed ended up.
So you've still kept that same passion and love for the game, even because I know some. I think when they lose that competitive level and they take a drop down, maybe they walk away. Maybe they say, I'm not as interested. But you still, I get the sense you still enjoy getting on the ice.
Absolutely.
Just throwing the rock.
Well, we have
itself.
There's every summer there's the Irma Summer Spiel that's in Irma, Alberta, and it's big. It's been going on for years. So
well, and after people hear this, who knows? I mean, we might double.
Well, yeah, and you never know. But it's a fun thing. So last year. Doug Dobry from Viking here, who won the Canadian High School in '67. Yeah. And then Doug said, well, you know what? Never really played competitively with you and I, your brother John, and Don Hafsel. So we're going to go play in the Irma Summer Spiel. Okay, good. So we go in there, and our aggregate age was something like 280, right?
Yeah.
And we're there, and the only guy that still threw the way he did it with a flat foot delivery is my brother. And he hadn't played because he's been going to Mexico now for 8 years. So he hadn't curled at all. And he goes, gets his old shoes out of the closet and an old corn broom that's ready to fall apart.
Yeah.
And we go to play in Irma, and we win 6 straight games in a row. We beat everybody, and we won the Irma Summer Spiel.
So that's your last victory.
Yeah, and it was and it was fun. It was a one-time deal, and where we all played, and we We beat the Alberta mixed champions in this thing. It was funny because, it's not a question of making shots. We could make enough shots, and we got 3 of us throwing with sticks, right?
Yeah.
But you could trick the other guys.
Well, I'm sure these other guys are going, those sticks shouldn't.
Well, of course they are. Of course they are. Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
But it's saved the game in a lot of ways, the sticks, because there's huge leagues now of stick curling.
Yeah.
Where all of those people that they wouldn't be playing otherwise. The clubs wouldn't have.
Well, we need to keep these clubs open because they're starting to struggle.
Absolutely,
Sure.
yeah. So even now, the Viking Curling Club this year, they've got 2 more teams this year than they had last year. So that's good. But I've played in they have a thing, Alberta 55 plus games, winter games. So my wife didn't curl till we moved to Viking. And so she started curling and playing golf. And so we played about 4 years ago, first time we entered the zones in Viking mixed. Vern Halfso and his wife and myself and Louise. And we won the zone. We went to Calgary for the winter games and 55 plus senior winter games. We won the gold medal in Calgary, and we're at the Winter Club where the final was played. And the guy that was presenting the medals was a guy I hadn't seen since about 1979, Paul Gausel. And so, wow, what are you doing here? He says. I said, well, why aren't you playing? I said, you're old enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says, I am. He's 50. I go, Paul Gausel's 55?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he was just this long-haired kid with a beard.
Yeah, when you were already
and I'm playing him
a
in the 70s.
Veteran, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But so the thing about curling is that, and it's like I got 2 daughters in Calgary, so I get to Calgary quite a bit. And so I run into Larry Wood down there. And we had just a great time because, you go back and you got so many friends in common, and you talk about curling in 70, 71, all that stuff. It was a fun game then, and the reporting back then, too, was more about the sport as opposed to trying to find something that isn't good about somebody or whatever. And all of those guys, Jack Wells, Jack Matheson, all the old type reporters were a really close-knit group, and they all went to the Brier, and they all went to the Worlds, so you got to know them pretty well, and they were all part of the celebrations when you won, and they also hammered you when you didn't win. I remember Jack Matheson writing about us in 73. We win 4 in a row, then lose 6. He wasn't happy, right? Well, no,
I mean, a lot of these guys were also very
they're passionate.
passionate about their provinces to a large degree, right?
Jack Matheson?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you what, there was never anybody more passionate than him about Manitoba curling. Mm-hmm. Nobody else could curl.
Yeah. His article, one of his articles in the First 50, it kind of talks to that.
Oh, yeah. No, it does. Yeah. And that's actually a
Larry
neat book.
Larry's pretty pro-Alberta, but I think he also has had a very good exposure across the country, and he seems to be maybe not as...
He appreciates it, yeah. Appreciates a lot of those other curlers. So it was a lot of fun. There was just Ernie Afghaniss. There was all those guys back then. Yeah. It was just a pleasure having them around.
So did Ernie had some involvement on the curling side then?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He'd be at most of the Briers, and he did some of the CBC the odd time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but and just a really super nice man. Mm-hmm. And they all were. And Bill Good, Sr. from Vancouver, that there was a real crew that would go to the Brier every year, these reporters, Don Blanchard from the Winnipeg Free Press. And so it was fun back then. And the CBC curling basically came out of Winnipeg. Leo Hebert was the guy that was the producer and so on of CBC curling. Mm-hmm. George Kent was the producer of that show way back in the early 60s when it started. They filmed it at Rossmere. And I went out and watched it because the Richardson team were playing there. And they were awesome. I'm going, wow. And that kind of got me into the curling thing too, was watching how good they were and how athletic they were. And so all those things, all of the guys that I've played against, I respect the players, always have. Merv Mann's team from Saskatoon, probably the best team I've ever seen that never won. But he won everything except never won Saskatchewan, and a lot of those guys, like Barry Fry, won Manitoba once. And that was the thing in the 70s is, man, if you could win, get to the Brier once, you were happy. And so Manitoba never really had until recently a team that would go kind of regularly.
Well, I don't think anyone, I mean, when Burtnick got there,
but see,
it seemed unfathomable what Stoughton could do would occur. It just didn't seem possible.
No, but they had such a good team, and Jeff was such a good player that they kept that team together, and they brought in a few guys, but the basics of it were pretty much there. And at that time, there was the odd guy who would come up like Vic Peters, but there weren't, he was kind of it. And McEwen would be against them, and McEwen could beat everybody else, but couldn't beat Stoughton.
I think that was fortunate for them last year, especially to win. It brought up memories of the Terry Bronstein rink, right? When all of a sudden there's, the rules have changed, and there's the Matt Dunstan rink that might win, but have already said they aren't going to go to the Brier. And it was kind of an interesting scenario there. He was going to get the Gary Ross. Obviously, Mike's had a lot of success elsewhere, and of course the game's really, I think, expanded nationally, certainly for a small number of teams where they're, the Grand Slams and so forth. But I think he really cared, despite all that other success.
Oh, he did.
That Purple Heart, and particularly the Manitoba Purple Heart, to win the Buffalo. Right?
That was huge. And he finally did it. The thing which is interesting with winning a Purple Heart is that once you win one, then the next one seemed to be a little easier because you've done it. Now you know you can do it. And for McEwen, it just had so many years where he should have. It's like Gary Ross in Manitoba. Gary Ross from Carmen. We kid him, he got hubcaps. He's got 6 runner-up Manitoba muffin tins like that, right? Never could.
I hope you don't kid him too hard, because that
never.
Well, I guess over time, it's probably he can look back on it fondly, but
and he was a great player. Gary Ross, that was a really good team, and they had situations where they should have won, and just somehow it would fall apart on him. I mean, his first final was 64, right through into the 70s, and 6 of those times. And then the nice thing was that he ended up winning the Canadian Seniors, and that was special because he finally won Manitoba and won the Canadian Seniors. And he was...
I can't think there's a person that was disappointed to see that happen, right?
No, there wasn't one, other than whoever lost the final. That's the only guy. I think it was Tommy Reed.
And that's probably the only... And even he probably had to think
deep
back
down.
on it.
Because you can't not like the guy. There was nothing about Gary Ross that would upset anybody. And that whole team, Chip Hand, all those guys. So it was nice to see him finally do that. But the problem, the issue nowadays for me with the curling, which is unfortunate, is that what we did in 70-71, you can't do that today because you can't get 4 young guys together and go and play in anything because you're not going to get invited because you don't have enough points.
There's a much larger barrier to entry. There's a big gap in front of you that you have to face.
And there's 10 teams, and ladies and men's in Canada, that get into that group, and it's difficult to move any of them out of that group unless they get to the point where they
step away. Like Kevin did,
and like Kevin did, and like Stoughton did, and then you get some of these new people in. But for young guys, and I think part of the reason why these guys are older in terms of average age is because you can't win early now because you can't get in to win. It's just almost impossible.
Strangely now the Brier has almost become your avenue in to some extent. And again, largely it depends because play down numbers are down. You're not having to play 63 other teams to get out of your club anymore. Now you just walk into a Bonspiel and then you're playing off to go to a provincial.
Well, if you want to play in Alberta, you just can enter the northern play downs.
Now the challenge in Alberta is it might be a little bit of a tougher province to get out of, but look, Kevin Cooey's, he's Team Canada now. He doesn't even have to play. So you look, to some extent, the exposure, and I look at a team like the Brad Jacobs rink, and I mean, they earned it. I mean, they worked hard at it, and they had to still focus at it, but by being in Northern Ontario and being the best team in Northern Ontario, they allowed themselves to gain opportunity to play on those conditions, to be in an arena in front of a lot of fans at a Brier, and that really gave them exposure and then gave them more and more ability to get better.
They actually worked at it, and they, because I played against the Harndens, their uncle and their father, back in Thunder Bay. I'd go down there and they'd be in there for the Thunder Bay cash spiel.
Which was a big cash spiel in its day, right?
Absolutely.
And in today's dollars, for sure. That was,
I mean, there's 10 grand first prize.
30 years ago.
And the same thing in like the Pacific Western at the Granite Curling Club. We won that in 78. It was $10,000. So there was, but it's all relative.
Yeah.
The car that I won in 1971, the Chrysler, I sold it for $1,500, a brand new car, because it only costs $1,800 to buy it.
Yeah.
So that's today.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. It's going to be a $20,000 car minimum. But so all of that has changed.
Yeah.
But
You're saying back to the Harndens and the...
Well, yeah, that I saw those guys. They played in the Brier in Winnipeg, and Jacobs was on the team. Alan Harnden, the father, he was the skip, but he threw lead at that Brier. I think it was 2008 in Winnipeg, and I watched those guys play. And Jacobs threw it pretty well. He threw the last rock. But the other guys, the boys, they were struggling. And what they did after that is they actually came out to Edmonton, the Seville Center, and they actually took lessons from, I'm not sure whether it was Randy Furby, but somebody straightened them out, their delivery, because the second man, especially at that point, really drifted when he'd throw the rock. The way he threw, he would pivot and he'd be letting go sideways and that. So the change from then, and they worked at it, and then they got, Barry Fry's son, who was kind of the traveling curler.
Ryan.
Yeah, when I played with Fry.
Challenging her and then took over Morris.
Yeah. And he's sort of gone everywhere so that he can win. And he's really worked at it, and that is a really good team, that team. No question, Jacobs. But there's a lot of good teams now. And there were back too when we were playing. But now there's more of a focus on it because they're playing on perfect ice surf. Every sheet they go out on, I mean, it's like the Masters golf or the PGA golf and that. Those pros play on perfect conditions. So it's set up to play well and to make it look good.
With rocks that almost seem to have like little explosives on the side when they hit each other.
Well, they jump. And the ice is made that way. And it's almost like it's slightly lower in the center to the outsides because, I mean, you watch those rocks coming in on television. First of all, they slide forever. And the sweeping makes a big difference. But when they die, they turn sideways. You can bury behind. You can put a rock in front of the button, and you can bury behind it.
Although these guys today play runbacks like you did,
because
back in the day, and make it 80-90% of the time.
When you throw a rock today, you could walk out, put a rock on a sheet of ice. And I can walk out today and I can hit that rock either turn without knowing what the ice does. Because all I have to do is throw at the edge of it, throw it hard enough, and it's going to get it. Either way, because ice is that way. It's not like all of a sudden one turn falls back 2 feet over here. And because all these old clubs you used to go and play in, they were all different. Yeah. All heavy, keen, fall. I mean, the Strathcona Curling Club was on almost a swamp. And the reason those guys from Strathcona would win every second Brier or a bunch in a row in the 20s and 30s and 40s was because of the ice they played on.
And they had the experience. Well, and Assiniboine was like that by the creek. I heard a story about, I think it was Errol Klink told me one story about there was at the, was it the old CFB? I think there was a spot on sheet one where you couldn't hit a rock.
Yeah.
If you put a rock in a certain spot,
you couldn't hit it.
You couldn't actually hit it.
So guys would try and hit and roll there.
To roll to that spot. Because there was no way to ever.
You couldn't get it. And the other old club in Winnipeg.
That's a challenge,
a huge challenge. The only guy who could get it would be somebody like Jimmy Pettipies, who had an intern helicopter spin.
Oh, yeah.
And he'd throw it like a baseball, and it'd just be spinning like 1,000 times down the ice. So where you let it go was where it stayed, no matter what the ice did. The other place was the Fort Garry Curling Club, the old Fort Garry Curling Club at the junction of the Assiniboine and Red River. And it was right beside the CN main line. So you're curling in there, and the train would be leaving the station going by. You had to stop playing. Because the ice was all vibrating. The rocks were vibrating on the ice.
And they might bounce and move on you.
Yeah, so you'd wait till the train went by, and then you'd continue with the game. I mean, it was cool because all these clubs were so different. And you play in the Manitoba Bonspiel, and 70, 71, in those years, we would play 25 games, starting Thursday night through to the Wednesday. And you'd be Monday, Tuesday, 4 games a day, Wednesday, 4 games. And they were 12-end games.
So I can understand why you moved from front end to back end as quickly as you possibly could.
I was Woody and Pettipies. They those guys were like I said, they were like bears. And they go 4 games in a day, 12 ends, and their hands would be raw. Like it was difficult. But we did 8 in the morning till midnight all day.
Where would you find any time to have a beer or two? I don't understand.
Well, you didn't. If you were winning and you're on both sides of the draw, you had no time for anything. Just get in the car.
For some guys, was probably the best case scenario.
Yeah, but then there were other guys that had their little things they took on the ice with them.
I've heard stories about those. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they still make them today, but there used to be the broom that had the little, you could twist off the end of it.
I've got one over there, the Scottish one, that one right over there.
Yeah.
It comes apart, and there's a little spot there where you can fill it and have a wee dram when you're out on the ice. Yeah. The Scottish people like that a lot, so it was good fun.
So, is there anything else we haven't chatted about that, or something I could ask you about that I missed?
No, it's all. I mean, there's always stories and they pop into your head.
So, I mentioned this to you earlier before we started talking that I always like the gamesmanship, and you've talked. I mean, obviously there's camaraderie, but there's also gamesmanship. I mean, you guys probably didn't even need any at that point in the early '70s. I mean, the minute you walked on the ice, probably other teams already were nervous.
Well, and they wanted to beat us. And I can remember one time we were playing at the Highlander in the Manitoba Bonspiel, and there was a team we were playing from Le Pas or somewhere up Thompson or whatever, and they had a bunch of their relatives and friends come with them, and so they were up at the upstairs of the Highlander, and we won the game. But at one point in the game, the guy from the other Thompson, he made a great shot, and Jimmy Pettipies jumped away from the glass. He says, "They're coming through the glass." And they were pounding on the glass. I thought, they could.
They just love the experience.
Oh, sure.
Playing you guys. And it must have been fun. You were probably having that number on your back where everybody was...
Well, everybody wanted to beat you. And there was 2 things that I'll remember that Jimmy Welsh told me. He was a fabulous man. And, like I say, went to 4 Briers, won a Brier, he and his brother Alec. When I was playing with my dad, and we go down to the snake room in Deer Lodge, and Jimmy Welsh said to me, they didn't have bars. They just had these rooms that everybody had their own bottle down by the boiler and stuff. So I'm down there. And
you're a junior at this point.
Yeah,
so they let you down there.
And Jimmy Welsh said 2 things to me. He said, "Rod," he says, "always remember, you can't eat curling rocks." Yeah, you can't. So you got to actually work.
Yeah.
And the game is a game. But you have to make a living because you can't eat curling rocks. He said that. It was a great comment from Jimmy Welsh. Yeah. And then the other one was, he said to me one time, he says, because I asked him, you've won these Briers, and he and his Alex, they 4-time Manitoba champions. He also had the worst record in the Brier. The last Brier he went to, he was worse than we were with Danny Fink, Jimmy Welsh. But he said, if you win the Brier, he says, you'll never, ever, the rest of your life, have a social game, because no matter how old you get, they'll want to beat you. So he said, you got to accept that.
Yeah.
And he's quite right.
So when you were playing in that 100th anniversary or that 125th MCA,
sure,
they were every game you played.
Well, I mean, Resby Coots comes to see his son beat, Rod Hunter, John Bubbs, Bob Janian. That's and Resby's there for that. And then because we flew, actually, John Bubbs had just flown in the night before from Florida to come and play. So, and I stepped out, and he went in to play. But those guys, I have a lot of fun, and they can still play. John Bubbs and Bob Janian. I mean, they've done well in seniors in Manitoba and stuff like that. But Janian now is retired. He's got a place in Palm Springs. John Bubbs travels. He's got a resort down at Falcon Lake in the summer, right by the golf course there. A bunch of cabins. You go down and see John there, and he's always got beer, cold beer. So the whole way that everything unfolded back then. Not that you make a huge amount of money. But you did well. But it opened a lot of doors.
But there's definitely, I think that's, you can't eat rocks.
Can't eat a curling rock. Never forget, Rod. You can't eat a curling rock. Yeah, that's it.
That was good. Great.
It's perfect. When I first met Don Wiles and Bob Bowie, they were playing with Billy Walsh Jr.
Yep.
And he was a really good player. And they played out of Fort Rouge. And then he went to Ottawa. Bill Walsh moved to Ottawa. And those guys ended up with different people. They played with Bronstein. They lost the Manitoba final in '76 up in Flin Flon. It was Bowie and Wild.
It was the one in Flin Flon,
Yeah, they lost to DeBlonde. Terry was a skip that year. So unfortunately, those guys didn't get a Purple Heart. And they were very deserving of it.
Yeah.
but it just didn't work for them.
Yeah, well, there's only so many to go, right?
No, it is, and it's funny how that works.
Many. You didn't.
Yeah, I guess I was greedy, but I know that the Blondes, the Finkbeiner boys, Don Finkbeiner in particular, when I first was in Winnipeg, we lived on Sackville Street, and the next door neighbor was the Finkbeiners, and we've been friends forever, the Finkbeiners, and we played against them quite a bit. Like we beat them in the '73 Manitoba final. Yeah, and they eventually did win, and went to '76. They should have won that Brier in Regina. They were the best team. Yeah, that's the one that Jack McDuff won. But Jack McDuff, those guys, Toby McDonald, they played great. And they had Sam Richardson was their driver coach. And that made a huge difference. I mean, if you talk to Jack McDuff today, he said that Sam won them the Brier by just the way he handled them, the whole thing. So it's kind of cool. A great storyteller. There's a guy, if you could ever get a hold of him, Jack McDuff. He and Sam Richardson together were just the best comedy routine you've ever seen. Yeah. And the Brier in 2006 in Regina, McDuff came out for that, and Sam, and they had them on that the Purple Heart Lounge or whatever they call it, where you one-on-one, where they're up there sitting, and you can ask questions and they're telling stories. But those two guys, absolutely bar none, could be on any comedy show, anywhere, anytime. Well, Ray Kingfish was one guy that was very instrumental, and he died way too early, Ray. But he was big time. And Warren himself, I met him in '73 we were in the Brier, and Warren wasn't in the Brier, but what happened was Jim Armstrong with BC was sweeping, corn broom, popped a tendon in his wrist.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So he couldn't play. So those days, you didn't have a fifth man. So you play without. But anyway, Jack Tucker, who was a skip, and Bernie Sparks was on that team, they talked to CCA, and the CCA allowed them to have a sweeper. The sweeper was...
Couldn't throw, though.
Couldn't throw, but could sweep. It was Warren Hansen. Okay. So all of a sudden, Hansen's in the Brier, and that's where... And he and Jimmy Pettipiece that year got to be really good friends that week. And so at the end of that, Hansen was starting to talk about, well, let's put together a curling school. And Jimmy Pettipiece knew the Air Canada guys from the Silver Broom, one of the vice presidents of Air Canada, and they formed the Air Canada Silver Broom curling schools. It started in '73, and it was Jim Pettipiece and Warren Hansen. And they got Jerry Peckham, who was on that BC team, ended up with them. In '75, I went to Newfoundland and went to and New Brunswick, taught for those guys, the Silver Broom Curling School. And that became very, very popular. Air Canada funded it, passes for flights and stuff. And then from there, Warren got into the runnings of the Canadian Curling Association and took the Brier from the event it was, which was a successful event, and blew it up into a huge event. I mean, you go way back to the days of Ken Watson. Ken Watson was as good a player as there ever was a student of the game, used to intimidate players because he'd basically walk out with his Purple Hearts on.
Oh, did he? Oh, see,
sure. He wore, and he'd, read this, and like, you read this, right? And
would you like a copy of my book at the beginning?
Yeah, pretty much. He was an awesome man, but he was kind of an early guy because he got the World Championship going, was Ken Watson. Yeah. Ken Watson with the Scotch Whisky Association, and Ken Watson also was instrumental in getting the Canadian High School Championship going. All of that was Ken Watson because he was Mr. Curler, and he used to get mail like that. Mr. Curler, Winnipeg, Manitoba, and it would get to Ken Watson. So he was the early on guy.
The postman knew where that mail was going. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. And he was a really big deal. The first one, curler, that was really a big deal because he won first one to win 3 Briers. And there were guys in Manitoba that won 2 and all that. But Ken Watson was just the level above everybody then. And then the next thing that came along was the Richardsons. Matt Baldwin in between, because as an individual, nobody better at making the game fun and just having a blast.
And a character that could draw people
total
in.
character, but he had different guys all the time, right? And then the Richardsons, 4 of them show up. And for 5 years there, they win 4 times, right?
And this is now kind of into that post-war, it's the
you're into the
time.
59, 60, And the other thing was, it was the first team, the 4 Richardsons. It was 4 guys could play. Ken Watson had his brother in every one, and he had different front ends all the time. It really didn't matter. We'll pick this guy up at the club. And there was a bunch of guys won Brier with Ken Watson, with the 3 he won, all different, except for his brother, Grant, who played third. And the Richardsons were the first from lead to skip team. And they changed everything. That was when Norm Houck got his 4 guys together. And it's actually when the teams then, we got to have 4 guys that can play. And all the teams started to change then. And so you still, to this day, the unfortunate part is that International Curling Association, Canada's got 1 vote, U.S. has got 1 vote. All the other members like Korea, Norway, they all have 1 vote. So it's kind of going the route of hockey, that the European International Curling Federation is kind of making a lot of the rules.
I actually forgot to ask you about something and Warren brought this up. In the first Worlds that you played in 70, right? It was a semifinal and a final, so the team got a bye to the final.
Yeah.
Then the next year, they made it top 4. Yeah. So you had to play a semifinal, one had to play 4. It's Warren's position on that was European influence trying to create a way for Canada to not make it to the final.
That's right.
And increase.
No, it was.
Yeah.
And
did you guys know that going into that?
Sure.
Well, I read off the scores to you. I mean, I can understand how, after the way you literally just blew through that competition in 70, somebody said, this Duguid rink's coming back. We better
well,
see
it
if we
was.
can put a rink
And they
in
also,
here.
and they also had a special trophy for the European, the best European team, which was goofy, right? Think about
did
it.
they?
Yeah, because they figure, so Canada, it'll be Canada or United States, probably Canada that's going to win. And if not, the U.S. has the ability to win. So then all the rest of them, we need to have a reason for them to come.
Really?
So they had a trophy for the European guys. Yeah. And at the point now, it doesn't really matter. These guys can play, and they're good at it, and they studied Canada, and they come here and play here, and that's how they have learned how to play. Like Nicholas Edin, first time ever won one of the events.
It's amazing that it Grant.
I'm surprised it took them that
long.
But those guys work at coming over here. I mean, the Chinese national team basically that year in the 125th anniversary, the opening ceremony was at the Granite Curling Club. We were part of it. Bertnick threw the opening rock, and I held the broom. And the Chinese team was there playing the U.S. champions from the year before. And so, and one of the coach of the Chinese team then was this guy Hamlin, whose son is a good player in Manitoba. He was a coach, and Roger Schmidt, who's been a coach for these teams. All these guys I know keep showing up, and you can get a coaching position. You can apply for it. You want to be the coach of the Czechoslovakian team?
Yeah.
Soupy Campbell has done that. He was from PEI. Moved out west here. He was a decent player. Loved curling. Worked in Calgary, was an ice maker and so on. Used to bring lobster in every summer. Phone me, get Lukowicz, and have a big lobster roast for the curlers. He used to go to every Brier, keep stats, do whatever. Big beard, Soupy Campbell. So he ended up about 4 years ago. He phoned me. He said, I'm leaving Calgary. I'm going to Halifax. I said, what are you doing there? I'm going to be the manager of the Halifax Curling Club. I said, cool. That's where my grandfather curled a bazillion years ago. Went down, as my youngest daughter was in law school at Dalhousie, so Louise and I went down in September to visit her and see what she was doing. Went to the Halifax Curling Club, and there was Soupy. He was the manager. And so I had a visit with him, and my grandfather's old trophies that he won, their name was there. He was president of the Halifax Curling Club in 1942. And my dad curled there during the war, and curled with Dr. Bill McTavish. They were both in the Navy. Dr. Bill McTavish won Manitoba in 51 and went to the Brier. And that team with my dad and my grandfather and Bill McTavish and another guy from the West scored an 8-ender at the Halifax Curling Club and lost the game. Now there's a great story. You score an 8-ender and you lose. Excuse me? Anyway, so then Soupy, all of a sudden, he disappeared from the Halifax Curling Club a year later. All of a sudden, this summer, I got a phone call from Czech Republic, and it was Soupy. Hey, Rod, Soupy. I said, where are you? He says, I'm over in playing golf in wherever this was, in the Czech Republic. What? Why? Well, I'm the coach of their team, their national team. Okay, good. And then he hang up, and I haven't heard from him. But out of the blue, he'll just phone. It's just, and he wanted me to move to PEI way back in about 73. Come down there, we can put a team together. We go to the Brier every year.
Okay, so there was talk of that at times.
Oh, sure.
I always
Yeah.
wonder over
Yeah.
You think about. I've thought about it now. I mean, now when you win the Brier, there's so much at stake. I mean, the funding, it's quite substantial, and it's probably the most lucrative Bonspiel you can win right now.
Oh, for sure.
And it could be one of the easier events to win if you
go every
try
year.
to do that. If you said, hey, let's get 4 guys, let's go to Nunavut, and let's see what we can do.
You got it. One of the best stories of all time is Orest Melishchuk. And you talk about having drinks. Okay, 63, and he was playing third for Barry Fry. And they went to Calgary. There was this big cash spiel put on by this promoter in Calgary. And they played it in the arena and so on. And Richardson, Gervais, all these guys are there. So Melishchuk walks into the dressing room with Fry. And in the dressing room, they're getting ready to play the Richardsons. That's their first game. So Orest gets in there, opens his duffel bag out, gets his shoes out, brings out a Mickey of rye. And he takes it and he downs about half of it. And he puts the lid back on and sticks it back in the bag. And somebody in the room goes, Orest, don't you know who you're playing? Melishchuk's report was, yeah, if he was any good, I'd drink the whole thing. And I talked Ernie, I've talked to Ernie about that.
Yeah.
And they went out and they played 13 ends. Richardson won. Ernie said, Melishchuk didn't miss a shot. In 13 ends, he made everything. He says, I've never seen anything like that. Well, yeah. If we were playing anybody any good, I'd drink the whole thing.
Yeah, they were young guys. You know what? I've heard that story a couple different ways. I like the way you tell it. I'm glad we got that.
But so there's just those kinds of stories and stuff. And, everybody's characters. There's just so many characters in curling.